Welcome to Perspective and Potential, where we uncover new ways to see the world and tap into the incredible potential within each of us. I'm Abigail Straight, joined by my co-host and mother, Gwen Fund. Together, we'll explore ideas, stories, and strategies designed to help you grow, shift your perspective, and embrace a more complete version of yourself. So, whether you're ready for a big transformation or simply curious about the small steps you can take today, our goal is to inspire, encourage, and support you on your journey. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can check us out at perspectiveandpotential.com. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in and see where a new perspective might take you. So we've been talking a lot about happiness lately. Last time we spoke specifically about gratitude and how a grateful mindset lends to a happier life. Well, today we're diving into a topic that's both deeply personal and universally relatable, and another one of our foundational attributes to living a happy life. That is forgiveness. It's something I think we've all wrestled with at some point, whether it's forgiving someone else, seeking forgiveness, or even learning to forgive ourselves. Forgiveness can feel like a big ask, especially when the hurt is deep. But what if choosing forgiveness could improve not only your emotional well-being, but also your physical health? What if it could help you move past the anger and resentment that's holding you back and lead you to a place of peace? In this episode, we're going to explore the incredible benefits of forgiveness, clarify what forgiveness is and isn't, and discuss practical steps you can take to start the process. Along the way, we'll also touch on proven programs that can guide you through this journey. So to start, let's talk about the profound connection between forgiveness and our mental and physical health. What's actually happening to us when we choose to hold on to anger or resentment instead of forgiving?
Well, to begin on that topic, let's address the benefits associated with forgiveness. It's very difficult to be happy when we aren't mentally or physically well. And people who are generally unforgiving tend to have high cortisol levels due to constant rumination and the stress that inflicts on the body. Now, high cortisol is associated with a lot of health problems, from depression and anxiety to cardiovascular issues. They find themselves in this victim mentality with all the negative energy that goes along with that mindset. The anger, the self-esteem issues, relationship problems. Their blood pressure rises. Their muscles are tense. Their body becomes like a kettle building up steam. So forgiving or learning how to forgive is like turning the heat down and allowing the body to return to normal function. Benefits to us physically and mentally far outweigh any perceived good that comes from holding on to a grudge.
Yeah, that's such a powerful metaphor when you think about that boiling kettle and just, the steam coming out. So can you share an example of how someone might recognize when their kettle is about to boil over?
Well, rumination is our first and best clue on that, as well as those feelings of hurt, fear, or anger that come about as we ruminate. And if people don't understand what ruminate means as a fancy word, that just means we can't stop thinking about it. No. So it just cycles over and over and over again in our brain. So when we notice ourselves being out of control emotionally, we have to make a decision before we boil over. When you're feeling victimized, it's at that moment that we need to make the decision that the thing that just happened is not going to take over the rest of our life. Also, there are some personality attributes that seem to correlate with a better ability to forgive. If we try to cultivate those attributes in our own selves, it can make our ability to forgive easier. So studies have linked the big 5 personality traits of agreeableness and humility with being more able to forgive. and emotional instability with being less able to forgive. So here we are, we're right back to reaction versus response. So we also need to understand that secure attachment with early caregivers, secure current attachments with the relationships in our life, and a high self-esteem also seem to correlate well with being able to have the ability to forgive. So we have to understand that the reality is that it's in our own best interest to learn to forgive. Our forgiveness is really less critical to the thing that harmed us than it is to ourselves. Forgiveness is first and foremost about healing ourselves.
That is such an incredible point. And I just want to say that one more time. You said our forgiveness is less critical to the thing that harmed us than it is to ourselves. And I think why that is so important is because it can be very easy to fall into this trap of thinking that forgiving someone else lends to this sense of injustice, as if like the act of forgiving is letting someone off the hook or getting away with something. But what you're saying is actually different. It's that forgiveness actually has nothing to do with how guilty someone was or whether or not they received just consequences for their actions. It's actually more for us and our overall well-being. So how does someone begin to reframe forgiveness as something that they do for their own well-being rather from the person the person who hurt them?
Well, I think the Elizabeth Smart story is a really good example of this. I remember reading part of her story and thinking that this one part describes perfectly what we're trying to explain. After she was rescued and was able to return to her family, her mother told her something to the effect of, hey, Brian David Mitchell has already taken 9 months of your life, and don't give him any more of it. But now she took that advice to heart. She has since flourished. She's become a strong activist for child safety. She married. She has a family of her own. She has turned tragedy into triumph because she overcame the emotion that ravaged so many people who remain in that victim mode. Now, in contrast to Elizabeth Smart's story, I'm reminded of an old parable that I learned a long time ago. It's a story about a man walking through his village and he sees a piece of string on the ground. He stops and picks it up and puts it in his pocket. Now, someone else in the town has lost a coin, and the townspeople believe that the man picked up the coin and put it in his pocket. And when the constable and the townspeople gather around and question him, he tells them, no, it was only a piece of string that he found. So, unwilling to accept his answer, the constable makes him turn out his pockets, embarrassing him in front of all the townfolk. Now, the rest of his life, he can't let that feeling go. He remains hurt and angry at the constable and the town people for not believing him and causing him such embarrassment. And on his deathbed, the man's final utterance was, it was only a piece of string. The town had long since gone on with their lives, but the man carried that hurt and anger to his final moments.
I think that is a powerful parable because it just reminds you the significance of being able to focus on what's ahead. And something that comes to my mind as I hear that parable is I think of the experiences that I've had with students who've come to schools where I was the principal, and they really had been dealt some hard cards early on in life. Maybe they'd been removed from their homes, from their parents, or they've lost parents to drug overdosing or lifestyle choices. And there's this unresolved anger there at a very early stage in their life. And so it makes me think perhaps that's some of our listeners, but now they've grown up, right? Maybe they too had some sort of traumatic event when they were in their young adolescent years, but they're still holding on to some of that resentment. And here's what I noticed would happen with students early on in those foundational years. They would come with that chip on their shoulder, unable to let go of that feeling. And it impacted their future personal connections. It impacted their abilities to really build strong personal connections with their peers, with their teachers, with the other people that came into their life. And so what advice then can we give our listeners that maybe have experienced some level of trauma in their younger years, and they're still feeling unresolved and haven't been able to move on to that place of forgiveness? Because what I'm hoping that we can get to is not sitting on our deathbed saying it was only a piece of string, right? How do we give them advice and how they can move forward?
Well, okay. First of all, I think they need to understand, and all of us need to really understand how vital that attachment is to our development and our mental and physical health. And it does begin at birth. We come into this world as helpless beings. We need someone to feed us, keep us safe from the world around us. And baby brains are very active, and they learn very, very quickly. Infants who are not cared for properly learn very quickly that others are not to be trusted completely. Instead of this healthy, secure attachment with others, they develop what we call dysfunctional attachment styles that they then can pass on to their own children. And this lack of trust is usually something that they learn in order to survive in their environment. If they weren't being fed enough, they learned to steal food, right? Food and a warm environment are not enough. I mean, they did this studies in orphanages and found that, babies who were just fed and kept warm, they didn't develop normally. Little ones need a tremendous amount of care and energy. They need to be cuddled and enriched through socialization with their primary group. Impaired caregivers, and by that, we can look at parents who are drunk or high, or distracted caregivers, the ones who can't put their phone down, who have a tremendous amount of stress in their lives, or are really disinterested in parenting. They create children who will have these strong survival behaviors like stealing food, fighting, and having control issues in their life, which in turn create those socialization issues that you were talking about for the child as they grow. So the advice that I have for anybody who tends to recognize theirself in any of that description is you need to seek out a competent counselor, because there is a process that goes along with being able to reprocess all of those memories in the vein of forgiveness that we're talking about right now. Being able to forgive our parents for the things that they did, and at the same time freeing ourselves from being a victim to those things.
A word that we've mentioned a few times so far today is the word journey. I think it's going to be really powerful if we can shift our perspective to look at forgiveness as a lifelong journey and process rather than a, one-time exchange. So like when we feel harmed, we forgive and we move on, right? Or forgive and forget. But perhaps if we took a look at forgiveness as a process that takes time, it might actually help us with our mental and physical well-being, that, when the hurt isn't just gone overnight. And I think that's really important to acknowledge, right? Because a wound doesn't heal as soon as the initial pain is gone. But the more we aggravate it and hold on to the anger or resentment, it actually just weighs us down in ways that we might not even realize at first. So it brings up another important question. What then does that process of forgiveness actually mean? If it's not just about letting it go, what more is it, is there to the process of forgiveness?
Well, I don't think a lot of people have a clear idea about what forgiveness is or isn't. Forgiveness is ultimately being able to let go of the negative feelings associated with some sort of harm or offense. In some cases, it is the glue that can help to heal a fracture in a relationship, but not always. We can confuse forgiveness with reconciliation.
Interesting. So what exactly is the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation?
Well, reconciliation is not always possible. Forgiveness is. Okay. So in some cases, the perpetrator might die, or he might not be removed in some way, or in many cases, it isn't advisable if the harm was severe, repetitive, or was abusive in some way. However, the person who experienced those things can still go through the process of forgiveness to rid themselves of the unhealthy stress and reclaim their life at a safe distance from their abuser. Sometimes legal repercussions for the abuser are totally out of our hands. Again, we can go back to the Elizabeth Smart story where Brian David Mitchell actually was convicted and sent to jail. The law will pronounce whatever justice is ordained, but as victims, we need to crawl out of that mindset and work at restoring our own emotional peace through empathy and compassion and the setting of appropriate boundaries.
It reminds me a little bit about a conversation I had with a friend once who shared with me that she was brought up in a household where she experienced a significant amount of verbal and emotional abuse, specifically by her father and her mom. She felt like didn't do a lot to intervene. So as you can imagine, when those situations happened and you turn 18, you just leave it all behind you, right? You think that's it. That's all I need to do is I just need to become an adult, and then I'll leave, and all of my problems will be behind me. And so she did. She distanced herself. She didn't have a lot of communication or contact. She really just kind of, put a hand between, her adult self and her childhood.
She put that boundary up.
She did. She absolutely did. But what was interesting is that as she grew up and got married and started having a family and kids of her own, she did realize there was a part of her that wanted a relationship between her kids and their grandparents. And so, she did try to integrate her kids back into the lives of, having a relationship with their grandparents. But it wasn't long before she noticed that time and distance hadn't actually changed the behaviors of her father. And specifically, it hadn't really changed how those actions were impacting her. And what I remember her saying was that she had to create firm boundaries for that relationship to continue moving forward. She had to become very clear in how those interactions would take place between the grandparents and the grandchildren and, the environment that they would meet up in. So how does someone then navigate the decision of whether or not reconciliation is healthy or even appropriate?
Well, of course, what comes to mind automatically is battered women and the abusive parents that your friend encountered. But in any of those examples, trust has been broken to a point that reconciliation may not be wise at all, at least not without those proper boundaries. we have to understand that trust is the glue, the ultimate glue of any relationship. And, there's different strengths of glue, right? And so when trust is broken, the relationship is jeopardized, sometimes permanently and other times with proper boundaries. The stage is set for trust to be reestablished minimally by the perpetrator as they seek forgiveness through apology and a change of behavior. Unfortunately, it's most often the case, and that we're hurt more deeply by those that we feel closest to: our family, friends, coworkers, God, and even ourselves. In each of these instances, we are provided an opportunity to take a close look inside and work through this process of forgiveness. Now, it's important to note that anger and revenge will never, can never correct the wrong that has been done. And those things will only hold us prisoner to the pain and suffering that we feel.
Yeah, no, that is important. And, when we think about how anger and revenge are never going to correct the wrong that's been done, how do we recommend to those who are trying to approach forgiveness with family or other intimate relationships where they may still have ongoing contact? What are some ways that people can shift out of that mindset of revenge and anger and into just a place of emotional peace?
Even the most awful broken trusts still need to be civil sometimes, like in the case of divorce, where there are children and visitations that need to occur. I've seen firsthand where one parent may try to poison the child against their other parent. And these parents are so not thinking about the impact that this very thing is having on their children. And, the abuse that actually is happening to the child through their actions.
I feel like you were going to say selfish. Is that fair? Because I think that's fair to say, because what you followed up with that was, I think you were going to say that they were being selfish because they weren't thinking about the children, which is true. And I think, that's an important part of this process is acknowledging that maybe we feel pain and we feel hurt. But what you're saying is, by choosing to react and poison the child, really, it's not helping your pain, and it's only furthering the pain of your child. It's different than creating a boundary. A boundary can help protect, but the poisoning isn't protecting them from, it's like, I think in the mind, it's, well, I'm going to start to lay these clues because this is how they hurt me. And so I don't want you to feel hurt by them. So I'm going to tell you, I'm going to lay these little seeds that make you feel like you can't trust them. You shouldn't engage in a relationship. But one thing I think that's important is that relationships are personal to the individual, right? So a broken marriage, that relationship was between those two people. It's not necessarily the relationship between the mom and their children or the dad and their children, right? And so I do think it's fair to say that if we are not thinking about the overall well-being of the children, that could be a selfish thought and just something to acknowledge.
I agree. So let's get on with the steps of how we find that emotional peace. So if it's possible, communicate with that individual, the one that has broken the trust with you, and establish boundaries. If you want to continue the relationship, that's one set of boundaries. Or if you want total, freedom from that relationship, that's a boundary as well. But stay centered on your own healing and take it step by step and accept what you cannot change. Now, your friend could not change her father.
Right.
she didn't have that button to push, right? And so learning to accept what you cannot change and learning to change what you can.
Right. And I think, in the relationships too that we were just speaking about, there's a reason why that relationship is no longer able to function the way it did originally.
Right.
And so we just kind of have to shift, right? We have to shift. We have to accept what we cannot change, and focus on what we do have control over. And boundaries are a huge part of that. And I think as we've unpacked the meaning of forgiveness and the role it plays in our relationships, our listeners now might be wondering, well, okay, how do I actually begin the process? Because, after all, deciding to forgive someone can be so much easier said than done. Are there tools or programs that can help someone really work through that process of forgiveness in a way that's meaningful and lasting?
Okay. First, let's start out by saying that it is initiated by deciding to forgive. And then second, realizing that the emotions that the hurt brought out will have to gradually fade. It is really not a one and done process. Anger and resentment can be replaced by positive emotions like empathy and compassion for the offender. We aren't actually going for endearment here, but a healthy neutrality. The memories no longer cause us harm, and we no longer harbor the desire to harm the offender. So you're going to still think about it. I don't like that forgive and forget, because our brains are so good. They remember a lot of things. So forgiving is not forgetting. It's learning to remember without the pain.
So why do you think so many people expect forgiveness to be a one-time event rather than a journey?
Well, they can say, I forgive you. It's that rumination thing that's going to be repetitive, and the emotions that will stir every time we ruminate about them, eventually fading with each remembrance until we're able to recall them with a different emotion. Now, Elizabeth Smart, great example again, she was able to propel herself into a worthy cause instead of letting the kettle of anger and injustice hold her captive. However, we have to understand too that real forgiveness is only attainable when we feel safe, and hence that need for proper boundaries. Mm-hmm. So for those who feel the need for structure in this process of forgiveness, there are a couple of programs that might help. Everett Worthington created something called the REACH program for those seeking to learn how to forgive. And it's each of those letters in the word REACH stand for a step in the program. R stands for recalling the hurt. Throw it out there on the table and look at it. Feel it. Understand what's going on inside yourself, where the hurt's coming from, what it feels like. The E stands for empathize with your offender. Try to visualize their reality. People do what they do for a reason. So why would this person do this? A stands for altruistic gift. This is your free will offering. It's about you, not them. It's about who you want to be and what you want your life to be like. C stands for commit. Commit to this forgiveness by writing it down in a journal or on a calendar so you can remember when you're tempted to fall into victim mode again. And H stands for hold on to that commitment. Every time you get triggered by that rumination, every time you remember it, you think about it, remember that you want to forgive this person, and you go through all those steps, and eventually, those neural pathways in our brain will get better and better and better at taking us from the anger and the hurt to the forgiveness.
I think that hold on is powerful. If I go all the way back to our kettle analogy at the very beginning, a hot kettle is not something you want to hold on to. So when we have that anger and that boiling point, that is not something we want to hold on to. But what you're, sharing is that we need to hold on to the commitment. And that commitment we should associate with the feeling of peace, because that is the goal. The emotions are there. We have to kind of work through that, but it's really important that we do keep it in the forefront of our mind. Like, what am I trying to really hold on to? Am I trying to hold on to the thing that's going to cause me pain? Or do I hold on to the thing that's going to bring me peace?
I love that. So now there are these two Australian psychologists, Wenzel and Woodyett, that came up with the Confess program for people who are seeking to be forgiven. And again, each of the letters in Confess stand for a step in the program. C stands for confess without excuse, accept full responsibility, no reasons, no blame on anything or anybody else. It's just a straight confession. I did wrong. O stands for offer an apology. Express your sorrow at your actions. N stands for note the person's pain. Be empathetic. I realize that I hurt you. I realize that I broke trust. F stands for forever value the other person and the relationship. Explain to them, how you feel about them and the relationship you have with them. If you really want to hold on to it. And, so then the next letter is E. It stands for equalize. Make restitution if possible. What do you need to do to mend or repair that relationship? S, the first S stands for say never again. Help to make the victim feel safe from the behavior that caused them pain. And then the last S is for seek forgiveness. Actually come right out and ask for it. Is there any way you can have her forgive me? Or how can I be forgiven by you? The next one, and we're talking about self-forgiveness here. This, I think, is one of the hardest of all the forgiveness things. We hold ourselves sometimes to such a high standard, and we criticize ourselves so much that sometimes the self-forgiveness gets overlooked. But really, self-forgiveness is restoring our emotional peace through rising back to the standard that we hold for ourselves. Moral injuries that we've actually done to ourselves. So taking responsibility for our actions, holding ourselves accountable for the pain that we inflict on others through our own failings. So there's a few steps to this one. The first one is really interesting, making things right with the sacred. Now, all 5 major religions value forgiveness. Therefore, nearly all human beings are brought up in a culture that promotes a moral code. And that moral code includes forgiveness and repentance. Our very laws are based on these moral codes. They're intrinsically tied to a belief in a higher power who defines what is right and what is wrong. So getting in touch with the higher power through spirituality helps to boost our power to succeed in the process of self-forgiveness. AA and NA are great examples of this. Of all the addiction programs out there, these seem to have the greatest long-term effect on people trying to make things right with themselves. And the first thing that they have to admit is that there is a higher power and that they need the higher power's help. Number 2, make things right with the people who have been harmed through your moral injury, through your not living up to the person you should be. That's showing contrition, making apologies, making restitution if possible. Number 3 is making things right psychologically. Stop being angry at yourself. Stop laying in bed ruminating about what you should have done instead of what you did do. And then number 4, make the decision to forgive yourself, realizing that it is a process that will eventually fade in time. And number 5, accept yourself as both flawed and valuable. I think this is a really hard one, right? It takes humility, but it also takes gratitude. You are very flawed, but you are important. You're important to yourself. You're important to your higher power. You're important to the people who love you. And number 6, setting one's sights on virtue going forward. Change your environment, change your behavior, change your beliefs, change whatever it takes to make you or to help you become the person that you know you should be and that you want to be.
You know, as you're sitting here going through these steps of self-forgiveness, I've thought a lot about, the times in my life where I've had trouble forgiving myself for maybe just not even handling something the way I wish I would have. And you do ruminate, you do obsess over it, you do sit there. You gave a very clear picture of sitting in bed. Sometimes, you're sitting there, you don't have anything else, you're trying to go to sleep, or you should get out of bed, and that thought is just replaying like on repeat. I think something that has also helped in that process or that journey of self-forgiveness is giving yourself some tools or strategies that will help snap you out of that rumination cycle. And it can be a lot of things. For me, music is very powerful. Sometimes I just need to kind of get out of my own head so that I can move forward and move on and start to recognize that, yes, I'm flawed, right? Being accountable for the mistakes that we make, but also balancing it with that's okay. That's how I'm learning and growing. And what is it that I can just use to kind of snap myself out of that rumination cycle? And for me, it's music, but I know, there's other things. Maybe it's that journal keeping that we talked about, maybe just getting it out there, having a trusted person that you can talk through that with, exercise, get out there and run it off. Whatever it is that helps you get out of that cycle, I think sometimes is an important first step. Just do something so that, as much as we talk about the brain, sometimes there's parts of our brains that we just need to be a little bit quieter so we can move on.
Absolutely.
And I think, in turn, what it does is it just allows us to become happier and focused on our growth. And then we're not only better equipped to forgive ourselves and move forward, but I think that exercise of learning how to forgive ourselves better equips us to forgive others along our journey of forgiveness. So, as we come to a close today, let's just pinpoint the most crucial points from our talk and consider how they apply to our daily lives. So first, forgiveness is less about the person who caused harm and more about freeing ourselves from the physical and emotional toll of anger, resentment, and stress. It's a journey. It is not a one-time act. Forgiveness is a gradual process, not a quick fix. It requires time, self-reflection, and intentional actions to shift from negative emotions towards healthy neutrality and personal growth. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Setting proper boundaries ensures safety and helps rebuild trust when appropriate while focusing on our own healing. Programs like Reach and Confess provide structured pathways to forgive or seek forgiveness, emphasizing empathy, accountability, and the commitment to move forward. In our next episode, we hope that you will join us as we explore the topic of spirituality. If you'd like to learn more about the podcast, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram and Spotify. We'd love to hear from you. Please share your thoughts or suggest topics for future episodes through our website or social media. Your input helps shape the conversation and makes perspective and potential even more impactful. We're Gwen and Abby, and you've been listening to Perspective and Potential. Until next time, keep exploring new perspectives, and remember that every small change can lead to something big. Food for thought. Bon appetit.
Bon appetit.